Happy Friday. Welcome to another MSP Cyber Roundtable. Today we're welcoming Bob from Simplex-IT for the second half of our crossover episode. Matt and I were excitedly featured on Bob's podcast a few weeks ago, and we just had a great conversation about business and about the IT space and where it's going and about cyber and about just it was awesome. So we're going to continue that today. We're going to talk specifically about taking ego out of cyber expertise. Cyber expertise is one of those things that you have to know a lot to be able to get into being an expert in cyber specifically. And when people know a lot because they've taken a lot of time to learn the depth of a single domain or a number of domains that go very deep in knowledge, it can be easy to have earned and unearned ego around those things. And when you're dealing with other business owners and when you're working with other teams and leaders, it can be important to manage that for effective relationship and partnership building. So Bob's an expert at this, I think, and he's going to humbly probably say something about how he's not. But I think Bob does an amazing job of making a level playing field for everybody and evening things out in a way where everybody feels like they can be comfortable being themselves. And I think that's a huge asset in the space. And I think it's going to be a fun conversation today. So welcome. And hi, Bob. And hi, Matt.
And I want you to know that it is important, especially when you're talking about these where we're limited in time, that we take significant steps to make everybody feel comfortable to having these conversations. And so I basically have to make sure that I am appropriately.
You got your ESA animal or your?
I have. So when I became, I outsourced my kids, as I say. So I have step kids and step grandkids and all that. And when my first grandson, who's now 22, I think, was about 5 years old. So he started getting to that. What's this? Why is this? Everything was a question. I just answered everything was a penguin. I said, everything is a penguin. What's that? That's a penguin. What do we have here? That's where penguins live. That's what So all of my kids and grandkids assumed that I love penguins. No, I just love traumatizing my grandkids. So I ended up I have so much penguin junk, which sounds like a disease, including this guy.
Love penguins.
And I penguins are fine, but.
It's just you threw him. Shoot.
It's just. This is a reminder, Bob, of all of the damage you've done.
Yeah, people are out there at the zoo for the first time on a date making mistakes. You got grandkids out there goofing, getting wrong penguin information, looking silly.
It's what I do. Now I just do it for IT. What's that? That's the cloud. What's that? That's
I almost ended up with a dog this week, guys. I went my refrigerator crapped out last week. And
boy, oh boy, there's just a prank phone call ready to rock.
So the fridge died. I already tried fixing it once. I gave up. I'm shopping for fridges. The wife's like, I think we could get one used for like way less than that. And I'm like, 100%. Oh man, we're gonna go get these used fridge. We're gonna get home. It's not gonna freaking work.
Or like there's gonna have been a body in there or something.
So anyway, the fridge story aside, I get to go pick up the fridge, right? And
you got a truck for that type of thing, or would you strap it to the top of the Hyundai, or what?
I borrowed a trailer, strapped it in the trailer, and I don't know if you know this about fridges, they can't be down like this, or you can't plug them in.
Because they got all the weight and then the Freon.
Yeah. So I kept it upright, strapped upright, which was its own crazy thing. But anyway, I'm there picking the thing up, and I'm carting it. We're getting it strapped down. They're like, "You guys want a puppy with that?" I almost went.
What kind of puppy was it?
It was like, "How much is the?" It was a Dalmatian, and I was like, I don't know what a Dalmatian.
When I was a kid, there was this movie. Bob, tell me if you've heard of this. There was a boy. It was called A Bunch of Dalmatians or something, and there was a lot of them. And there was the main character. Her name was Corella.
Oh, Corella DeVille.
It was called A Whole Lot of Dalmatians.
Right, and essentially it was the first known Dalmatian fetish film.
Oh God.
Yeah.
He went up to me. He went up to my nonsense. There we go. Beautiful. Well, Bob, tell people a little bit about your journey. You've got a grandson who's 22 years old, so that means that you've at least been pretty active for at least 22 years. So,
okay, first of all, let me tell you how grandkids are made before you get caught up in the.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I know. I know how to.
And again, I outsourced my kids, so even from that standpoint, no, I've been in IT essentially since '77, so predating PCs, predating microcomputers, and all that kind of fun stuff. And I've worn every freaking hat. I've been through every revolution, evolution, so on and so forth. I've been IT director, CIO, developer, DBA, all of that kind of fun stuff. I've also been, this is important, the most ignorant person in the room at many meetings, and appropriately so, as well as I've been the expert in the room, and sadly so, or debatably so. And it's one of those things where, so that the good thing is that gives me the perspective that I can basically say from a situational awareness standpoint, from a, is this really as critical of what's going on, so on and so forth. But also I've been in rooms where I really don't have a freaking clue what's going on, you know, from a technology standpoint, from a risk standpoint, from a security standpoint, so on and so forth. And it's important to know which one's which, because depending upon the room, that switches up around. And my ego is a freaking mile thick. So I don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. I already know I am. No, it's one where I want people to be smarter than me. I want you to be sharper than me. So.
You need them to be.
Absolutely.
If everybody is less than you, then you have to hold the most weight. And that might not be.
So I'm overweight. Fine. Thanks for bringing that up. I saw the size of your hat, dude.
You see that? I got them on a feeder too, and they're still, you know, they're happy, you know, they're healthy, and that's the most.
I actually have a 20-year-old cat at home.
Yeah,
a lot.
That's awesome.
My dad.
Good.
And she's still upright. And she is the skinniest little critter. She really is.
The skinnier they are, the easier it is to clean and take care of themselves, which is an important thing.
Is that an inside-outside, Bob, or just inside?
Oh, just inside.
I've got this theory that only the smartest cats make it that far. I don't know if that's true, but
I don't know, because she has outlived about 4 or 5 other cats, and all that, and she loves attention. She gets it when she wants it.
I believe humans and animals. This is something I'm going to get weird with you. We're going to do it, but I'm going to do it. I believe humans and animals, if they're interested in what's happening around them, if they're happy with life, if their body's being taken care of, I think they can live a lot longer. But you get those animals that people don't pay attention to. You get those kids people don't pay attention to. You get those family members that people don't pay attention to, and they start to get sick and not happy and, not healthy. And I think if you pay good attention to animals, they live a little bit longer. I've seen cats go 25, 26 years old.
So you could flip that over to IT professionals.
Do it for me, Bob. Flip it.
No, I mean, from the standpoint of when you talk about someone in IT business, and especially if you talk about somebody who's making the transition from an IT professional over to security, that's a huge, that's not, I'm going to learn the latest version of server. I'm going to learn what the difference between a cloud server and on-premise server. That's a completely different, cybersecurity. The last 3 things that have happened to this industry, big data, cybersecurity, and AI. All 3 of those require significantly different portions of the brain than all of the other earlier IT stuff goes. Absolutely, totally different. And totally different learning methods, and totally different goals, totally different analysis, totally different risk assessments, totally different tools. And one of the challenges, and I'm actually going to bring us to the topic, one of the challenges is when you have people who are given the opportunity and the responsibility to make that transition from being a network admin to that network admin who is security aware, to the network admin who is security responsible, to the security responsible person who is aware of networks. And, it's almost like a volume dial or a switch or a Venn diagram or however you want to define it. But you have so many people who are basically going to sit back and say, I know this, therefore I know that. Okay. Similarly, you have the same type of situation. Where you have someone who is familiar from the security standpoint, but doesn't understand business and doesn't understand that businesses need to make money. They need to be productive. There's that productivity and cost issue. And if we allow our ego to drive too much where we think, what we think the situation actually is, that hurts.
Okay. Whoops. Well, when it hurts, when those things happen and you have those damages in the relationships, what is A, the right way to handle it, and B, what's the right way to prevent those types of things from happening? Because when you have issues in relationships, there can be something that happens that scales over time and really becomes a serious problem for either a business relationship, interpersonally, or you may have businesses separate. You've had, I'm sure, over the course of your career, you've had businesses not continue forward with engagements or not renew because of differences in personality. How do you prevent those instances from happening? And then how do you remedy them when they do?
First of all, you don't necessarily prevent them. Some cases, it's a good thing to happen. The whole idea that the only good outcome is you get the business, or the only good outcome is the client stays, or the only good outcome, it's not necessarily a good outcome. I've said it, and I've said this more on the standing of the co-managed world, but the only thing worse than a good opportunity getting away is a bad opportunity signing. If we're really talking square pegs and round holes, then we got square pegs and round holes.
You're exactly right. Dumping time into bad engagements, bad relationships.
Yeah.
Square peg, wrong hole.
So part of this, it gets down to that whole, do we have, the right people in the right seats and they want it, which is kind of a part of the EOS mantra, entrepreneurial operating system, just from a standpoint of an employee. But the same thing is true if we take a look at organizations that are trying to collectively create, and we'll just stick with the security side of things. If we're taking a look at organizations that are trying to create secure environments and productive environments for either themselves in the case of the client, or in the case of their clients, in the case of or whichever providers or the like, you need to make sure that you got the right people and that everybody's got the right attitude and the right skill level, and that we're all willing to do some give and take and so on and so forth. And part of the challenge is that you have some people, and I'm going to stereotype here because there's all sorts of exceptions to this, and there's all sorts of nuances. So you'll have the security person who, no, you can't do it that way. It's impossible. That is wrong. It is horribly insecure. You're going to have to sign me a piece of paper that holds me harmless of anything bad that happens because you're
the finger pointing at them. You're bad. Exactly. You're bad. You're bad.
And your example uses the wrong finger. But yes, so you have that type of situation. Then on the other side of the fence, you could also have a client who's got a sales manager who are saying, my salespeople can't be productive if you're going to make them do these things. My sales is going to go through the crapper. We're going to lose 30% of our salespeople. We're going to lose 50% of our sales in 6 months because you're making us have multi-factor authentication. And in both cases, it's unreasonable. It's staying in your lane as far as what your particular priority is. And what your particular, the thing that you are saying is the most important thing. And truly, every day the sales manager gets up, they're saying, how much more can I sell? And truly, when the security professional gets up, they go, am I managing the risk most appropriately? Which most people, I shouldn't say most people, which a lot of people turn into I need to make it more secure no matter how secure it is.
How do you, I see salespeople, because I've been fortunate to manage intern programs where there are kids doing sales, 18 through 22, and they're shaky and nervous. And I've been fortunate to manage programs where some really awesome adults that are seasoned and have experience are in there. How do you manage a circumstance when somebody who is extremely uncomfortable in the sale process, maybe somebody's new, maybe somebody's tremendously inexperienced, and you talked about that feeling of insecurity. How do you either help somebody manage that, or how do you prevent that from becoming damaging? Because when you're so focused on yourself, it can be really hard to pay attention to your customers' needs. So how have you managed those situations in the past?
Well, and when it comes to really boosting other people's egos and morale and all that, I am so the wrong person.
Yeah.
But let's actually talk about it from both angles. Let's talk about the salespeople, and let's also talk about the security professionals. First of all, these people have to be empowered by their organizations to do what they're supposed to do. But they also have to be realistically engaged in terms of what they can't do. So to a security person, in this case, we're going to say a security engineer in a small medium business who is essentially just trying to lock things down and all that kind of fun stuff. They can't shut down the business. They can't. Because then the business goes out of business, which I read the book. It's a bad thing. And to some degree, people that they report to have to be able to do the risk assessment. And by risk assessment, I'm not talking about give me this checklist of horrible things, but you can't be 100% secure. Not going to happen. But there's a difference between that means we're not going to have armed guards, all pillboxes all around the building and all that kind of fun stuff, even though that would make us 0.00001% more secure. There's that. We're not going to do that, but we are going to put locks on the door.
So you guys you're talking about this this balance, right, between the security imperative and someone's opinion of a security imperative, really, right?
Right.
And someone's also opinion of what's going to impact their value contribution or value delivery, right? And I think that this used to be a bigger problem than it is now. And let me just expand on that. It used to be, as a security engineer, we implemented what was called industry best practices. How many times have we heard that phrase, right? Industry best practices. And for decades, what does that even mean? It's like, well, I'm smart. Whatever I think, that's industry best practice. Clearly, because I'm good. I'm good at this stuff, right? And if you were not a humongous business, there were no standards to follow because you were realistically not going to be able to implement all the security that a very large government or organization had, right? So you're randomly fumbling around implementing something that sounds like it would make people safer, which you may or may not have the skill, the expertise, the people and processes to make it actually happen effectively in the business. But that's not really the case anymore. The standards these days are really good at saying, this is for organizations that are highly critical, high impact, have a lot of money, have to defend themselves from nation state attacks. This group over here, right? This is for small business. You should do So, I mean, some of that decision making, at least from if you're willing to read the standards, right, has been taken away from us. I think there's still the individual, the security engineer in the room following industry best practices that needs to realize that, well, industry best practice isn't what you think because you're smart, right? Like someone else has already the industry has already cooked this up. So,
but here's the challenge with that, because I agree with you. It's better than it was, but it's also noisier than it was.
Oh, there's so many things to do, right?
There's so many things to do, and there are so many vendors, and there's so many experts, and there's so many solutions, and there's so many everything, every one of which is walk down the aisle of a CVS sometime and look at the deodorant shelf.
Yeah. And they'll all tell you they're the best.
About 100 different ways to make your armpits not smell. It's
Oh,
not
don't
that
even.
complicated.
It drives me crazy that there's 30 kinds of deodorant, but only 2 types of toothbrushes, and I like not the ones I want. Does that happen to you guys? All right.
Sure, sure does. Actually, I hate to say this. I actually have a toothbrush that I got because when I spoke at DattoCon in Paris a few years ago, about before COVID, and I actually forgot to take my toothbrush with me, and found at a drugstore in Paris the coolest traveling toothbrush ever. I still have the freaking toothbrush,
You guys
and
are
I've never seen it, and I've never ever looked for it, but I've
you
never
guys
seen another traveling toothbrush as cool as that. So
very cool. Very cool. Toothbrushes are important. So are getting expert advice from true experts. And I think Matt brought up a really great point that a lot of the industry will have you believe like, hey man, we've already figured it all out.
yeah,
But in technology, you're never going to have it all figured it out all the way out because it's the bubble, it's the edge of what's new and happening. So I always it I think that you should find ways to independently research. You should consider different methodologies, and you should apply what's best for you and your industry. And that may mean educating yourself and being sure of who you're getting information from.
well, and part of it gets down to what's your role going to be. Is your role transactional from the standpoint of you're in sales? Is your role relational because you're going to be part of the service, goods or services, delivering general services, including security to as an MSP to your client? Is it going to be expert relational, as in you're going to be doing the CISO role to larger organizations, or are you going to be CISO role or VCISO role through the vendor relationship, so on and so forth? And you can kind of make the case that depending upon that role, you kind of have to change not so much the ego necessarily, but the strength with which you promote your expertise and what your delivery is going to be. But it has to be scalable, both from a volume standpoint and to a certain degree from a fear, uncertainty, and doubt standpoint. If you're standing there talking to a bunch of and I'll use the term that I hate, MSSPs, which is a fictional freaking term, boys and girls. If you basically are talking to a bunch of MSSPs, then that gets into that situation of you're going to present yourself as content experts in terms of what you're given. Okay. But you can't use that same attitude and go to the CEOs of small, medium businesses, because you're only going to come off as this ego guy or gal who is just trying to make them feel insignificant, insecure, and not really
Nobody
helping
wants
them
to
make
feel
good business
less.
decisions.
Nobody wants to feel less. These are business owners,
Yeah.
Nobody wants to feel like, I'm not enough. Nobody responds well to that. Anybody that is in a position where somebody's trying to, I'm more, it's not a good thing. It's never a good thing, and it creates unhealthy situations. It's the definition of toxicity. I need to make you feel lower so I can do the sale. If you're ever in a situation where in sales somebody's putting you down or is holding their ego above you, they
Yeah.
may not have your best interest in heart. They may have their interest at heart only.
Well, and again, it gets back to that. What is the value proposition that any relationship brings? And the value proposition, I think our industry does an absolute horrible job of discussing what value is. So
That's sales, value communication. I agree. Keep going.
yeah. Well, no, I was going to say is that, so again, let's talk about that supply chain. So we've got a vendor who is creating some form of cybersecurity services that an MSP can consume and then deliver to their client. So we've got this three layer supply chain. At the end of the day, the consumer, the end consumer, the hero journey star is the client. So how do we communicate to that client that their journey is going to be better? Well, we don't do it by just basically launching off superlatives and how smart we are, how wonderful we are, so on and so forth. And so many MSP vendors only talk about what the MSP will be doing and delivering and how cool they're going to be. They don't necessarily educate the MSPs about how to have that same value proposition with the client. So to take that to that logical extension, the question is, and there's too much of that, we make you secure, like there's, now with Lemon or something along those lines, but we make it easier for your salespeople to securely deal with their clients so that they can deliver goods and service without having to worry about that sort of thing. By adhering to standards, and so that your clients will feel, meaning the MSP's clients, we're adding a fourth level, so that your clients will be comfortable that their data is going to be in safe hands if they do business with you. That's something that the CEO can understand. But if we get into the ego of, no, we're going to tell you how wonderful we are, then that's a bad delivery. Similarly,
and if you need to tell somebody how wonderful you are, how wonderful are you? Shouldn't it be apparent?
Well, they're just
Shouldn't
not
the
seeing how
differences be
wonderful I
apparent
am.
in the
Now
process?
we're getting back to my dating days. No.
Bob, I don't believe for you got grandkids and all the rest, and you're personable. I don't believe
It
for a
seems
second
like
you had a heart. Oh, go ahead.
whatever system you got there, Bob, worked out, I think.
It depends on the date, but take into account the CEO's ego. We have to make sure that whatever we're doing with their knowledge, that they shouldn't be experts on this stuff. If the guys, so I was talking to a publishing company, earlier today, and they were talking about, they were dissatisfied with the current MSP, and we're talking about making changes and all that. And the guy apologized like 2 or 3 times about how he doesn't quite know how this stuff works. But he thinks it should be easier. And my response to him is, look, I have no idea how to publish. I have no idea how to do any of the stuff that you guys do. And to be clear, I don't feel stupid, because that's never been my goal. It's never been my focus.
Bob,
So
I want
the
to ask
same
you a
thing is,
question
what's that?
about being an expert. I want to ask you a question about being an expert.
Sure.
How long does it take you after the first time of doing something? Do you feel comfortable reproducing positive results?
So that's a real good question. First of all, I'm comfortable with a lot of things, and I'm uncomfortable with a lot of things, but they don't have to be. They're not necessarily dealing with my familiarity, because I'm a bit on the spectrum of Asperger's, blah blah blah. So my mileage
really
will
well.
definitely vary.
If you are, you do a tremendous job of incorporating it into your person.
So,
For
but
real.
the issue is that if I'm comfortable with the thing that I'm doing, but not necessarily comfortable in terms of the results, I'm comfortable. I'm fine, because I'm okay with failure. Failure is fine. Failure is no big deal.
Hey,
If we're
a
not
little
failing
Chumbawamba.
daily, what's that?
I said Chumbawamba, baby.
Why, yes, indeed, chumba and wumba, I think together,
Both.
with a little paprika, tastes great. I have no idea what Chumbawamba is, but okay.
There's a song, Tub Thumping, get knocked down, get back up again. You know the song.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Now I know. Now I understand that. But it's one of those things where I have no problem explaining to people, hey, this is just the 3rd time I've done this, So I don't have this down pat, don't quite get it, don't quite it's kind of like cybersecurity. I am not, and you guys both know this, I am not anywhere near an expert on cybersecurity. I'm going through Fort Mesa, the CompTIA program, Trustmark, going through that process, involving the rest of my team, so on and so forth. And I'm comfortable doing it. I'm not all the smartest person, but I'm not presenting myself as if I am. Does that make sense?
Of course.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm super uncomfortable with that expert word, by the way. And I struggle with it internally. I hate the word. I've come to realize, though, there are people out in the world, like when you have a big problem and you need to solve that problem and you don't know how to do it, what do? You look for an expert, right?
Right.
And I look at myself and say, well, I don't know if I'm an expert in anything, but that moment you were talking about earlier, when you're in a conversation, you're in a room and you have to figure out, well, are you the most knowledgeable person in the room or are you not? Right. I've got a CISSP, but I'll tell you this, when I look at some of the security standards and they got 400 safeguards in them, there's some things in there I've never heard of before.
Yeah.
That's a daily occurrence for me.
Absolutely.
I know who to ask, though. I know who to ask.
But isn't there a certain level of expertise of self-awareness and self-knowledge? So that circumstance or situation comes up, you can evaluate yourself honestly enough and truthfully enough to say, I can do this with a little advice, or I can do this cold. I know this absolutely fine. Or I can do this with a little advice. I can do this with a little research. Ain't no way. I need help. So if you put me in a situation where it requires power tools, look, 10 fingers. The only reason I have 10 fingers because I ain't touching power tools. So I call an expert, my wife, who absolutely knows how to do all that sort of stuff. And she's
got all her
handy
fingers.
woman, absolutely ridiculously galore. But she also knows when she needs to go do some research. So she's always doing YouTube and this, that, or the other thing. There are things like I'm known as the expert on co-manage. I know about it. I know a lot about it, and I've written books about it. But I wouldn't call myself the expert or the like. So I think that's a great example in the cybersecurity world, especially as well, is for people to have that self-awareness and recognition. Just because you have that cert or just because you do that role does not mean you're an expert on everything. But if you're an expert enough on yourself to know when you can say, yeah, I don't know about this one. Let me check with, somebody else or the like.
Well, and that's reality, right? Because everybody knows I'm human. You're probably also human, as like
Rounding up.
maybe not, but probably we're all human. And if we're all human, it means we struggle with the same shit. We all want dopamine. We all want to not work, and we all have to do those things. We all have to take the kids to basketball. We all have to X, Y, and Z. So if we can be real with each other and say, hey, this is where the end of my domain of strength ends, and this is where I can freaking crank dingers all day, home runs. Then the person that you're communicating with says, okay, I can trust that this person is going to rock it here. I can trust. I need to find a solution here. And I think your point about that authenticity and that self-awareness, because you can't be authentic without being self-aware.
Right.
You first have to know who you are before you can show people who you are. So that self-awareness to be able to show that authenticity is what allows that other business owner who is an expert also at their business domain, probably, maybe they're shitty at their, maybe they aren't, but they're probably highly knowledgeable. That'll give them the confidence, like, oh yeah, this person authentically, as am I, am able to express, here's the lines. And people like that because then people know what the board looks like and they can play on it together with people and be creative and grow. And, and that's what community is all about.
So the two things I would say to kind of piggyback onto that, and a LinkedIn user said, you are all spot on.
Oh,
okay. I don't know if he includes the cat. That's my only concern, or she includes the cat.
Not named Spot.
There you go. So, but the two things I would say is that if you are authentic and all of that kind of fun stuff, is that going to work with every connection that you make? No. There are some CEOs who, damn it, they expect you to know everything. Okay. And in that particular situation, that's a bad opportunity. If they're going to hold you as if you have to be 100% perfect, 100% this, that, or the other thing, in the case of most managed service providers in the small, medium business world, that's a sign to run, do not walk away from that organization.
Set up for failure.
Yeah. And that's one thing. The other thing is, keep in mind the evolution of this cybersecurity industry. Cybersecurity was a sleeper industry up until ransomware. It was basically you have antivirus and you have a firewall, you're good. That's it.
Yeah,
Don't
it's like it would be like being worried about hurricanes until the first hurricane hit.
Yeah. And then you have the whole evolution of ransomware and all of that kind of stuff. And now we became we are absolutely going to nail people on fear. We are going to just be so verbal and so vocal about they're coming to get you. They're going to get you. They're going to do whatever. And you have that standard influx of self-appointed experts. We saw it with big data. We saw it with cybersecurity. We're seeing it with AI now, where basically all of a sudden the people who have additional consulting time on their hands or additional bandwidth are going to suddenly say, I have a solution that matches everything you
I
need.
know what you need to do.
Absolutely. I can solve all your problems. Please tell me what your problems are in the form below. And so you have all that stuff going on. And now we're toning it back. We're toning it back because some of the compliance requirements are becoming a little more standardized. Some of the insurance companies, Will, I see you there, are coming through and getting more specific as far as what you're going up. Will, it was not dressed up like a zombie vampire. That's just how you dress. But you have that kind of situation going on, where essentially now it's starting to become more and more knowledgeable. Now it's becoming more and more reasonable. It's becoming more and more where the risk is better defined. But it's still, there's still a lot of communication that goes on, and there's still a lot of ego in the game.
Yeah, I mean the both on that. So we're in compliance risk assessment world here in Fort Mesa, and we use that to help service providers inform their clients on what they need. But I'll tell you that the area is ripe with a lot of misinformation. I don't mean I don't want to call out any specific vendor, but there are really large engagement. You can buy a risk assessment for $50,000, and the auditor will sit down and with spreadsheets and hundreds of pages of documentation. And this company might be doing $8 million in business a year or $15 million of business a year. And at the end of the day, the assessor gets to the end of their risk calculation. They're like, okay, there's $1 billion of cyber risk, because they're just adding up cells. And then you have to right size it. So then they're in there, they're tweaking, and they're like, well, it's got to look reasonable for this size, and you have to think like how much value really is there in that process. So that's happening in risk assessment world. And on the other side, I heard a story yesterday from one of our partners, and I'm not going to name a specific vendor, but there's a vendor out there that sells vulnerability management. It's in the feature on their brochure. We do this, and we do vulnerability management. And the partner says, well, tell me about the vulnerability management. They launch into a 30, what probably would have been a 30-minute pitch, right? And eventually the guy just interrupts the salesperson and says, so do you scan for vulnerabilities or not? And the guy's like, oh, no, we can't really do that. So the vendors are just randomly saying they're going to solve security challenges. The assessors are randomly saying you have this much risk, right? And that is the space we're living in. And I don't want to bash it. There's some people doing some good work out there, but there are some people not doing good work out there. And how is the customer going to know who's the expert, right?
Mad Magazine, which those of you ask your parents who don't know, had this great cartoon of they had these two neighbors. One had, and they were both talking over a fence, and one had his kid with him. The other one had tractors or bulldozers in the backyard. And the one was real proud. And he said, yeah, we're putting in a swimming pool in our backyard. And it was like, I'm one upping you. And the other guy goes, oh, that's nothing. We've got an indoor swimming pool. And the first guy just looks crestfallen. He's like, oh man, you one up me again. And the kid looks at his father and goes, Daddy, is our flooded basement an indoor pool? And he immediately says, shut up. And whenever I hear this, we have these features. And, no, you don't. Or we're going to make you an MSSP, or we're going to make you CMMC compliant for, $200 or whatever. It's like, no, you're not. And part of it is an ego trip of from an MSP consumer of some of these services, you have to have the ego necessary to say, I'm better than that. That's not how I'm going to make because that's not going to last. It's temporary. It's that race to the bottom, however you want to call it. But you also have to be able to then communicate with your clients why that's not you. And why that is, and this is where ego can actually come in handy, is where you basically say, no, I have too much importance in the brand, in the responsibility in terms of who we are and what we do. So no, I don't offer that particular service at that particular level because it's not really the thing that you need. And I'm not going to give a starving dog a rubber bone. however you want to define it.
What do you think, Matt?
This is yes. Like going back to how do you know if you're the smart guy in the room, right? And the critical thinking of is this person hearing what I'm saying, right? And is this person hearing what I'm saying? And so from the perspective of I'm sitting in the middle of these two people, let's say you're not sure if this person has knowledge or not, right? There has to be a level of communication. And Zach, you were talking about it earlier, right? About the you were talking about the CEO responsibility, I think, right? But this idea of being confident in your own ideas, right? But also being open to someone might be smarter than you, right? Is that what you're hearing from the client, right? Or in our case, we talk to a lot of partners that come to us and they're saying, "Help me with cybersecurity," and some of them don't need much help, and some of them need a lot of help, right? And we have to figure that out. We have to figure out, are we the expert in the room or are we not, right? I think it's the core of what we need to do as value communicators, Bob, what you were talking about earlier, right? To figure that out every time we're talking to someone new, right? Or an existing person about a new thing, right? What is that level of experience? What's the level of ego that's right? And to be able to turn that dial
What's
up and
reality, right? Because ego is not a bad thing.
No.
Ego gets a bad rap by shitty people. Because shitty people with wrongly sized ego roll the fuck up and shit on everybody's parade. And people are, God, this guy's ego. This guy's ego. It's unbelievable. But so everybody thinks about ego in the most overblown version of it. But what ego actually is your vision of who you are. And if your ego's correctly sized, to Bob's point, then you're able to say, well, I'm good here and I'm not so good here. And I myself have a beautiful face, but I'm short. I know where my strengths and weaknesses are. I'm a great shooter in basketball, but I'm not dunking on anybody yet. If you know that, then you can play within what your strengths are. If you're a business, you should be doing those things. And if you right size your understanding of your business's strengths, your business's ego, you'll be, aces in your places. You'll be effective. If you know this is who I am, I'm a little bit, I'm spicy sometimes. If somebody cuts me off on the freeway, I'll say a curse word right in the car and I'll shock some people sometimes. But I know that about myself. I know my weakness. And if I'm able to consider that and be thoughtful and open about my weaknesses, then I can also be thoughtful and open about my strengths. That ego is right sized. So ego is only a problem when it's too small and you're not able to say, wait, this is what I bring to the table, so that somebody's value isn't able to be recognized, because that's loss, right? Hey, I've got this great idea that could make millions of dollars. If somebody isn't strong enough to voice that and the company doesn't grab that information, that's loss, because the ego was not right sized. It was too fucking small. If somebody rolls up and says, everybody shut up, I know what's supposed to happen, and I'm the Don, and I'm everybody, me, that creates loss as well, because in the same thing, I can't hear everybody else. I can't hear all the other ideas. We're going to walk down the path. How far down the path are we going to go before we realized we were following somebody that didn't know where the fuck they were going? And there's all these different issues as it comes to ego, but we're so ready to just talk about it being a bad thing. Ego's a tool.
Yeah, and I would double down on a couple things you said, especially on the person who has the undersized ego. Yeah. And however you want to do it, whether you call it a confidence thing or a good perception of what they have. And this is from a leadership standpoint, and I've been guilty of it myself. I know I'm probably busting your image of me, but a situation.
In fact, you're actually staying exactly within the window of what I expect of you, to be honest and authentic about your strengths and weaknesses.
But it's one of those things where when you have, because we've gone into co-managed situations, we've gone into situations where the management has said, we want to get rid of our IT guy or gal because they suck. They're horrible. We've got really old computers. We got old servers. We had one client, and this was about 10 years ago, who basically said, we want you to come on board, doing co-manage, but within 2 months or so, we then want to fire our guy and just have you guys do the full manage because we hate our IT guy.
Oh, that's
Okay,
a rough
we're not
situation to
going to
walk
do that.
into.
We're going to come in, we're going to do co-managed, and if you then want to get rid of the guy or whatever, go find another provider, because that's the only way we're going to do this. If the guy is truly horrible, that we'll have a conversation. Well, it turned out when we started talking to the guy and we asked him, and he showed us, he had been begging management to make improvements, good, smart, solid improvements, and they've ignored everything that he asked for. And in the meantime, the same company approved all of the improvements that we recommended, which were the same freaking thing.
Well, I've heard that 1,000 times, Bob. I've heard it 1,000,000 times. And when it was in food, I would walk into, I'd take over a struggling store in Salt Lake City. I had the fortunate opportunity to support, I think, 47 of the 50 stores in the space. So at a lot of different moments, I got to walk into a store, talk to a person. There's a gentleman, I won't say his last name and he probably will never see this, but his name is Miguel, and I like him a lot. He's an awesome dude. I remember walking into the store and I would be like, "Hey man, your food cost is way out of line. People don't have uniforms on that are right, and you don't have opening drivers." And his response was, "I don't have scales, and I've asked for them 1,000,000 times, so I can't teach people proper portioning. I don't have uniforms to give to the team. And now because half the team isn't wearing uniform because I didn't give them, now the old schoolers are now showing up in sweatpants and their own shit. So now I've got that problem that was created by not having what I need." And then whatever the last thing is, that's a similar point, then I won't belabor it. But the idea that if you don't do what's necessary to achieve success, whether it be giving your team what they need, or whether it be educating people properly, or you're talking about the situation with the IT guy that's having a conversation with management. You guys need to invest X, Y, and Z so I can do A, B, and C. If they don't do that, of course you're going to look like a dipshit.
Yeah, and we found ourselves in a situation where we literally said, "Look, if you want to fire this guy, go for it. You'll still see him though, because I'll hire him." Yeah. And 10 years later, they're still a co-managed client. He's still their IT guy. So, and I just see we got a comment from Eli. How do you deal with clients who have employees who insist? Cool. Eli, here's part. It sort of depends on the role that you're being brought into. If you're being brought into as the expert and you have management support and all that kind of fun stuff, it's basically an educational opportunity. And what you can essentially do, and let's talk cybersecurity on this standpoint, because I'm going to use all of my expertise, which by now you figured out I have none. So this is where you essentially go, look, sometimes you can actually have solutions or situations that will tactically work, but they won't strategically. And this is one of the reasons why we look at what the industry best practices are, what the standards are as far as NIST, as far as CIS, as for going to the CMMC. We're going to go that route because that's the stuff that insurance will recommend or will recognize. That's the stuff that compliance will recognize and work with. Are they absolutely 100% the best? There is no such grading scale available.
Exactly.
So we're going to do that. But here's the thing. When we use the best practices, when we go with this standard, the aggregate of all this stuff that we're going to do is going to fit like a nicely defined puzzle. When we go for the individual pieces or parts, which is usually where they're coming from, they may work individually, but they won't work collectively as an aggregate. If you have that person who is honestly listening and you're respecting their opinion, then you're going to have some level of success. If they go, no, then you're going to have an issue, in which case it's a management question at that point.
Yes, Bob, you are freaking God. You got the sauce, Bob. Keep going. It's a management issue.
I want to add to that.
On this too after Matt. Matt's excited to add something, and so am I.
So, and this is related to what Bob just said, but I love borrowing credibility. I like seeking out, okay, who's the real decision maker here? Whose opinion really matters, right? Is it the person I'm talking to? Is it someone else's? And understanding who they trust. If they trust, you mentioned NIST, right? If they trust NIST for whatever reason, right? You don't have to have an argument. You could just say because NIST, right? If they trust accountants, you don't have to have an argument. You could just
You have to
say,
know them
because
well
the
enough to know when to
AICPA
trust.
says so.
You have
Yes,
to
you
know
have
them
to
well
figure that
enough.
out.
Yep. Keep going. Keep going.
And that's
Well, but
actually that's a
in
great
my
point.
mind, that's the secret. Figuring out who do they trust now? Who do they trust now?
Yeah. And it
They
may
don't need
be
to listen to me. They can listen to the people they trust.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and you could
If they don't
definitely
trust, if they don't trust anyone, that's another
And
another
that's
issue.
a different problem. Yeah, it's a totally different
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah,
Bob, you
and
were
that's one of those
something I
things
wanna
where you
touch on.
can't go down the rabbit hole. You can't follow. You can't argue again. And God knows we all know this in the world
Because
today.
that's an ego thing, arguing with them.
It's an ego thing. It's a what are they considered to reliable sources of information, of standards? What is their definitions of
Yeah.
prioritization? We've been brought in to more than one organization for co-managed work, and the stuff they have is a god awful mess that works. It works, and it works well because there's one person who understands it completely and all of that, but it won't scale to us. And we basically have the conversation with the client. We say, look, we'd love to co-manage with you, but the only way we can co-manage if we use the best practices that both the industry recognizes and we recognize and train. And otherwise, we can't do this in a productive way without charging you a ridiculous sum of money. So we either have to move over towards what we consider best practice, or we can't do work together. So Eli, to a certain degree, I would say the same sort of situation is there. But yeah, it's one where you can't butt heads completely. You first work with the collaboration, education, respect, all of that. The next stage would be talk to management, get an idea from their perspective, how much they want to support that person and back that person's opinions and so on and so forth. And ultimately, it's going to be can we, because remember, your organization is there to make a profit. Okay. Can you still make a profit and deliver the goods and services that you're expecting to deliver?
Exactly. I want to touch on a couple of pieces of this. One, Matt, you're going to love this. Put that thing back up on the screen, man. I know that you wiped it away because I'm going to piece it apart. But so, first of all, if you've got, Matt, you're going to love this. If you've got clients that have employees that are insisting that they're the expert, if you're truly the expert, then you should be capable and patient enough with somebody that is clearly not, to guide them to the knowledge necessary to understand what they don't. Especially if you're in a co-managed situation and you're the expert, you're like the domain expert. If you're not able to take a client or an employee of a client and go through the why behind the behaviors, the why, you love the why behind the behaviors. This is why we do it this way. This is the value. This is the reason it's better than what you're saying. Yes, you're right. And this is specific to your domain. Your information is slightly wrong. You should be confident enough within yourself and within your business's practices to be able to take the time to effectively communicate and have a conversation to get them to a point where they understand. Now, if you're dealing with a client who you have a main point of contact with whose employees are reaching out to you with issues, that sounds like the client needs to figure out how to manage their employees. But if you're in a situation where you're responsible for the outcomes and you're receiving pushback, the answer always, whenever you're receiving pushback from somebody that you're responsible for, and I've done a lot of this as a leader, I've walked into a lot of stores, Matt, where the people in the store thought they were an expert about Domino's operations more than me, even though I'd operated in 100 different stores and this person had only been a general manager for 6 months. That's ego, right? That's it, And you walk in, and the way that you solve a situation like that, you help them understand where they're wrong. You're patient enough with them to help them learn to close the gaps on where the lack of knowledge is. And you got to be able to work and communicate with them. Anybody that is actually an expert, I mean, think about like Karate Kid. His mentor was an expert, and he was patient, and he was slow, and he was methodical, and he was
you'll get it when you get it. It wasn't, all right, let's rush. It was, I'll help you understand. So you may need to be more patient, Eli. You may need to explain the why more, and you may have to drop some of the damn ego, in my honest opinion.
So a couple quick things to add. Eli, when you're saying the competition for internal, if it's competition, you're already behind the 8 ball. You've already got a challenge, and that's going to be, and not to push my book, but this was why I wrote, this is my third book, I Don't Want Your Job. Is co-managed IT services the right fit for you? This was written for that resource, to explain to them how this has to be a partnership, and it includes topics such as exactly what you're talking about, how we are going to come with best practices, and it's not always going to be in line with what you do, but there's a reason behind that. And there's a certain question of the worst time to learn CPR is when you're having a heart attack. The worst time to have this kind of relationship conversation is when there is that disagreement. So there's like a conversation I always go through with the internal IT folks ahead of time, where I get like, look, I got to tell you, we're going to bring best practices. It is never there to make it look like you did a horrible thing, but it is going to try to consolidate and standardize. We will show you what they are. We'll explain them to you. We'll show you the background, so on and so forth. And if you have that discussion ahead of time, it's easier for you to then basically say, yeah, you remember that conversation we had? This is exactly the situation I'm talking about. And boy, I tell you what, let me send you some information as to why it's this practice versus that practice and why this makes. But I'd also love to hear from you as to why you think this is cool way, because we're always learning, but we've got 60 companies to support, and I've got 10 technicians. And so we've got to have a certain best practice for all that kind of fun stuff. And we also know everything changes all of the time. So on and so forth. Yeah. And there's one other comment from somebody: always stick to the basics and facts, but always also stick to what they value. Whoever it is you're talking about, what is their perspective? Aim it towards their hero journey. Because otherwise you're basically coming up basics, facts from your perspective, which is you coming from the outside in, or from the company, the client company's perspective, which sounds like you're excluding them. So how do you make them as much of the hero as they can be, not with window dressing, truly the hero?
Yeah, because that's what they're paying you for as a provider, so that they can go out and hit the home runs. They're not paying you to step into the box for them. They're saying, I'm a business owner. I'm going to own a business, and I need this to happen. Can you come in and be a small cog in the machine?
Yep.
And if you come in and you're like, I'm going to come in and I'm going to be a big cog in the machine, and I'm going to be the big dog, then they're like, oh, God, well, where's the space for me to be the big dog? I want to be this, and it's like, that's when the ego's in the way.
Cool.
Well, Matt, we didn't get to do a lecture today, and I'm kind of bummed about it.
There's always more Fridays.
There's always more Fridays.
I'll give everyone the 20 second. If you're trying to figure out how to support a government contractor client, just send me an email. Until then.
You talked about the book. What else, other than the fact that you guys deliver amazing fully and co-managed services, which I believe is true. I know you do co. What else should people know about you? Do you have communities, or am I just imagining that you're a community style cat?
I mean, as far as on the MSP side of things, there's a co-managed IT services Facebook. Doesn't have a lot of activity, but it's a good place to go to when you want to know more about co-managed. Always reach out to me if you have any co-managed questions for the MSPs. Always happy to just join on a conversation or anything along those lines. And if you're an organization who's looking for managed services or the like, reach out, and happy to talk to you that, whether it be managed or co-managed. From a marketing and from a sales standpoint, the last thing I would say is the sales process that works best for us for both managed and co-managed is StoryBrand. And from a marketing standpoint, if you go to our website, simplex-it.com, we have developed over 500 videos in the past couple of years. We are big believers in the they ask you answer, which are just short videos that simply ask individual questions. It's a great way to create educational content and all that kind of fun stuff. And
You have a
reach out.
podcast.
Yep. BizTech Twists. And thank you for joining that.
It was so much fun. And then the book. So thank you guys for joining us. Next week, we're going to have Amy Babinchak coming back. She's awesome. She's like a peer group expert. I think she recently transitioned out of owning an MSP. And she lives in Michigan, which is a special thing to my heart. It doesn't really mean anything to probably most other people, but I think that's cool. So it's going to be a great conversation next week about peer groups. Happy weekend, everybody. Long live your cats and long live your businesses. Have a good
and I hope that Dalmatian finds a home.
Yeah, how many were there? It was how many Dalmatians?
Oh, it was just one.
So many
one
Dalmatians.
tied to. It was tied to a stick, and it was right in the way of the fridge. Like we had to trip over it to.
Fridge Dalmatian, my favorite.
All
All right, bye everybody.
All right, guys. You too. Take care.
See you, Bob.
Thanks, everybody.